So I'm now going to welcome you back for a second time and lead us into our final session, because we look outside of the UK to Taiwan. As the coronavirus crisis hit, Taiwan immediately identified digital initiatives as core to it beating the pandemic, swiftly mobilizing grassroots programs, and response showcases the digital government at its very best. It was reactive, engaged, and supportive. And at the helm is Audrey Tang, Taiwan's digital minister. When they were appointed in 2016, Tang was both Taiwan's youngest ever government minister and the country's first transgender minister. An acknowledged global thinker and an undisputed leader through the pandemic. We're delighted to welcome them to CogXtra. Audrey will be interviewed by the world's expert in interviewing, my idol Kara Swisher, co-founder and editor-at-large of Recode. She's just told me that she's launching a new New York Times podcast called Sway on September the 21st. So I'll be already looking forward to that. Kara, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Great. Take it away.
Thank you. Is Audrey there?
Hello.
Hi, Audrey. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
We have not met, but I do know a lot about all the things you're doing. And I think let's just dive right in because we have a limited amount of time. And
Sure.
we would love some questions from the audience as we're proceeding. We'll cover a wide range of things, but if anybody has any other questions, please put them in wherever you're supposed to put your questions, and then Audrey will answer them. All right, let's just start off with a sort of the bigger picture. One of the articles I read about you talked about Taiwan using democracy as technology. Can you talk about what that means?
Sure, certainly. So there's a saying that anything that we're born with is human nature, and anything that's invented after we're born is technology. And because when I was born, I was still under the martial law. There was no freedom of the press. And the first direct presidential election was in 1996, when I was already 15 years old. So for me, democracy is definitely a acquired thing. But because 96 is also the year that the World Wide Web became really popular, not just in Taiwan, but also around the world. So our first presidential election is combined with a online campaign as well. I was, online campaigning was one of the candidates who didn't win, by the way. But anyway, so what we're saying is that on the day one of the first presidential election, there is already the World Web hyperlinks. There was no hashtags, but there was, web link chains and things like that, GeoCities. And so because of that, the internet and democracy in Taiwan is the first generation of people, that's us, that can do both. And so instead of like hundreds of years of a proud tradition that we have to keep, in the subsequent years after the World Web gets introduced in Taiwan, our constitution went over more than 5 amendments. And even the Referenda Act, for example, underwent amendments as well. And all sorts of different participation technologies was then scaling the listening of the people, not restricted to uploading 3 bits every 4 years, which is called voting, by the way.
Okay, that's a good way to put it, voting. We call it other things in the United States right now, unfortunately. So talk a little bit about how in normal times the Taiwanese use technology and how it's integrated with the government, because it's been very slow moving here in this country. We do a lot of things analog, digital. Of course, we have things online, but it's not as integrated. So talk a little bit about how citizens look at it. You were talking about the idea is that it isn't government talking to citizens, it's listening to citizens. So talk about the uses of technology in that regard.
Certainly. So in Taiwan, we pride ourselves as offering broadband as a human right. That's the presidential promise from Dr. Tsai Ing-wen that we delivered, I think, as of last year. So anywhere in Taiwan, you're guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second, unlimited data connection at just 16 euros per month. If you don't, it's my fault personally. And because of that, and it's unlimited both ways, people can upload all they want. So there's a very vibrant culture of people essentially just live blogging, YouTubers as young as 10 years old and things like that. And I think one of the things that also distinguish Taiwan is that we have a single payer universal health system with its own IC card, so that when the COVID came, for example, we were able to do mask rationing very quickly because it covers more than 99.9% of not only citizens but also residents. And that digital authentication is really the key of our early pandemic response as well, because people can feel safe that they wouldn't incur either a financial or a social burden when they develop something like COVID symptoms and go to the clinic, which is why we never went into a lockdown, but still successfully countered the pandemic with only 7 so far.
So you feel technology is that way. I want to get to COVID in a second, but the idea of internet access as a human right, it is not widely seen that way around the world. So talk about why you think that is the idea that if you aren't linked into information systems, you don't have the ability to do these things?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that's because, as I mentioned, the first presidential campaigning was done partly by the internet, right? And so just like, for example, Estonia is a very similar situation. They literally wrote their constitution after the internet. And so it's very easy for people to, after being exposed to the culture of listening at scale that the internet offers, to demand the same of their politicians to respond in the here and now. And so I think that forms part of the Taiwanese culture. And also we're a bunch of islands, but the largest island, the main Taiwan island, suffered a lot from earthquakes and also typhoons, except for the past couple of years where we didn't really have typhoons, but we had that natural disasters all the time. And when the roads are broken, when all the pathways, the mountains slide and things like that, people rely on internet, on broadband technologies to not only keep each other safe and let each other know that they're safe, but also to coordinate rebuild projects, rescue projects, and things like that. That is also why the social sector has a very high digital competence, especially after the very large earthquake just around the turn of the century.
And so when you're thinking of it as a human right, the cost is keeping the costs low for people. That's a cost borne by government, correct?
Well, for example, when we're doing our 5G auction, we designed a market mechanism so that there's a lot of surplus money. And we specifically earmark this to the most rural, remote, under-resourced places, and then tell the telecoms that if you make your 5G infrastructure there, because for them, self-driving buses or ships is not a nice to have, it's actually a must-have. And so for these more remote places, they actually enjoy what we call the sandbox, which is experiments on how the emerging technologies interact with the society and enjoy them more. And it has been the case actually since I was 12 or something, because back then we didn't call it broadband as a human right because we were still on dial-up. But the internet affordability has always been seen as part of the healthcare or education around the turn of the century. These are considered basic human rights.
So when you're moving into COVID, when you have crises like an earthquake or a natural disaster, talk a little bit about how it went into place and what and how the citizens worked with the government. There were a number of things. There was transparency, obviously, about medical information. There was an ability to communicate with the government. There's monitoring. So talk about each of those things. First, talk about transparency.
Yeah, certainly. So if the staff can help sharing my screen. Okay, right. So we call our digital social innovation in 3 pillars: fast, fair, fun, very easy to remember. And the transparency, which enable collective intelligence, is born of social sector. The equivalent of Reddit in Taiwan, called PTT, is run by the not-for-profit sector, actually just by a bunch of National Taiwan University students. And when Dr. Li Wenliang, the whistleblower from Wuhan, shared on their social media that there's, and I quote, 7 new SARS cases in the Huanan seafood market, it gets reposted, upvoted, noticed by the medical officers around that midnight, and the very next day, we begin health inspection for flights passengers from Wuhan. And so that basically showed that the governments trust the people to crowdsource the agenda for a emerging situation on a not-for-profit social media, and relies, of course, according to a Civicus Monitor, this Human Rights Watch organization, Taiwan is the only country in Asia, if you count New Zealand, one of the only 2 in Asia Pacific that has a completely open in terms of freedom of speech and assembly and so on. And so the transparency is evident by this daily live stream of the Quint, the 5 medical officers, which all brief the people, but there's a toll-free number and also a chatbot that you can just dial and have a empathetic human being listen to all your questions about the coronavirus. And not only that, but also it's a listening device. So for example, when a boy called back in April saying that when you ration mask, I don't get to pick the color, I have this pink, I don't want to wear pink, my schoolmates will laugh at me. The very next day on the live stream, all the medical officers wear pink medical masks. And Commander Chen Shizhong, the minister, even said that Pink Panther was his childhood hero. And so the boy became the most hip boy in the class. So that is a very quick iteration that shows radical trust and transparency from government to the people.
Okay, talk a little bit about finding out medical availability everything,
PPEs.
PPEs,
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we do mask rationing based on our national health insurance card, but the visualization and the accessibility of the devices that shows the availability is actually not gov tech, it's rather civic tech. In Taiwan, we have government website that ends in something .gov.tw. For example, this is a participation website where you can do petitions and participatory budgeting. But for each digital service that the people don't like, they can just register the same domain, but with a O change to a 0, and just by the single letter to digit change in your browser bar, you get into the shadow government. That is always more fun. And then the call to action is to fork the government, important pronunciation, fork the government to offer useful initiatives and to make sure that, for example, when people don't know where to find PPEs, there's a young civic entrepreneur in the Tainan city that offered this map out of his own pocket that shows on the crowdsourced way, like Ushahidi, right? People mark which stores still have masks installed. The only problem, of course, is that I think he owed the Google Map API usage like $20K US dollars by the second day. And so he had to take it off. But then the GovZero collective went into action and started searching for solutions. And because I'm part of them, I look at this map, I bring this to our prime minister, our premier, and he said, we need to trust citizens with open data. So now, instead of crowdsourcing, starting early February, if you use your national health insurance card and swipe it on the pharmacy, you can just get the rationed mask. Nowadays, every 2 weeks, if you're an adult, it's 9. If you're a child, it's 10 medical masks. And the people queuing after you can look at you, swipe your NHI card, and expect the map to show the availability goes from 58 to 49. If it rather goes to like 70 or something, they will call 1922 right there and report that there is something wrong. And so because we released open data every few minutes, actually in the beginning, every 30 seconds, it's not just open data, but it's actually open API. And the open API enable not only maps, but also chatbots, voice assistants, and also analytics that shows that when we're ramping up the mass production from 2 million a day to 20 million a day, this is actually happening. And we co-create on the distribution mechanisms and work with convenience store that open 24 hours a day, for example.
All right. So the idea is to know where you can get them and to know where they're going up and down, so people are using it fairly. You say trust citizens with open data. This is an idea that you trust them to see where things are rather than be confused about it.
And also take their feedbacks, because there was a member of the parliament, the name is Gao Hong'an Nkao, who used to be VP of data analytics in Foxconn. So she knows something about data science. And then she, in a parliamentary interpellation, used another civic tech map that shows that even though that the distribution seems fair on a distance basis, it's actually not that fair if you count the rural places where using public transportation, what looks the same distance on the map is actually very different in terms of hours spent traveling to the pharmacy and things like that. And the commander, Minister Chen Shizhong, was enjoying very high popularity back then, but he never defended his policy. He just said, legislator, teach us. And then we start co-creating the algorithm. And so she posted on Facebook the very next day saying that, so yesterday's interpellation become tomorrow's improvement. So it's also a co-creation, evidence-based policy-making tool.
Right. All right. And what about monitoring? Because this is critically important. It's the idea that you keep people digitally quarantined immediately, and actually enforcement is the issue. I mean, here in this country, there is no enforcement of anything at all. And it's from the top, unfortunately. But in your case, you're really enforcing these quarantines. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure thing. So our quarantine is called a digital fence. So I may as well write that, the digital fence.
Okay.
So the basic idea is that when you come back from any foreign country to Taiwan, you are given two choices. You can either go to a quarantine hotel, which you are physically barred from leaving for 14 days, or you can, if you have your own bathroom in your home, apart from other people, you can also choose home quarantine. If you choose home quarantine, your phone is put into the digital fence. And if you don't have a phone, we give you a phone for 14 days. And the idea is that the cell phone communicates the signal strength with their nearby cell phone towers anyway. And through triangulation, they can very easily determine the rough location. So this is maybe like 50-meter radius. This is not very precise, but the idea is that people are very familiar with it because that's precisely the kind of technology that we send automated SMS in advance earthquake warnings or in flood warnings when a typhoon comes. And so if they break out of the quarantine, it sends SMS not only to them, but also to the local household managers and police who will then show up to check your whereabouts. The idea is that for the 14 days, we do not collect new data. There's no new app to be installed. You don't have to turn on the GPS, but SMS will be sent. And people understand the privacy implications. That is to say, their whereabouts will not be monitored after that because we never declare an emergency situation. Everything has to be constitutional.
And so if they move, in real time, that's if they move out of the zone they're supposed to be in, which is their apartment.
That's right.
You're aware, and then how quickly do people respond? What is the response?
Usually within 1 minute. Because if you stay in your quarantine place, be it a hotel or your home, we pay you a small stipend, about $33 per day for 14 days. But if you break out of the quarantine, you're fined and you pay us back 1,000 times that. So you can fund 1,000 people in quarantine, I guess. But the idea is that the penalty is very severe. So people do not break out of the quarantine. And the same goes if their phone runs out of battery, for example, or if they do not respond to the chatbot inquiry, checking twice or thrice a day about their temperature and how they feel about the system, because their mental health, their mental well-being is important. So they can talk not only to chatbots, but actually to like professional care workers that care about their well-being in their quarantine home. And after the 14 days, of course, they're free as other citizens.
And the participation in saying how they're feeling or their temperature is required.
Of course. If you don't respond to those SMS for a while and your phone doesn't move for a while, then the police shows up.
And what is the rate of cooperation? Because one of the things, there has been the idea of having contact tracing and other things here. Nobody uses it. Nobody uses it whatsoever. How do you get people to use these things and think about them in a way they're being helpful?
Oh, this is not up in though. Right. So the compliance rate is very high. And so the question to ask here is that whether people feel that it is a additional privacy intrusion. And the answer is yes. According to polls, when we first introduced the digital fence, and of course, very few people break out of the quarantine because the fine is astronomical. There were, of course, people questioning about both the constitutionality and also the privacy implication of the system. And we explain, of course, it's the telecom sending the SMS. We're never, tracking your whereabouts in this centralized system. There's 5 different telecoms collaborating in this digital fence. But basically, people still have their question. And because we never declare a state of emergency, of course, we have to answer to those parliamentary hearings and interpellations. So before the interpellation, I think the support rate is around 91%. And we thank the 9% for reminding us that we have to explain it in lay people's terms. And after the interpellation and public hearing, the approval rate become 94%. But we still, of course, thank the 6% for keeping us honest and accountable.
And then the information that there is used once 2 weeks is done, they're released from the fence.
Yeah, because we don't collect any extra data. The cell phone tower have your signal strength data anyway, and they do the log rotation on the usual basis.
And when you think about getting cooperation, the amount of cooperation, obviously your numbers speak for themselves in terms of how that's happened. Do you feel there's any trade-off? Were you worried at all about the idea of being able to use it for many other things?
Yeah, of course, there's always this threat of like mission creep, right? People would also want to use triangulation to, for example, I don't know, care about people's who spend time alone in their home and their house needs renovation or whatever other proactive delivery that people may have in mind. Although I worry about it not a lot because none of the other uses are constitutionally approved. This is constitutionally approved only because we had an experience of barricading an entire hospital unannounced with no fixed termination date, an unexpected lockdown of lots of people in Heping Hospital back in 2003 when SARS 1.0 came. And the Constitutional Court ruled that it's barely, thinly constitutional, and charge the legislature to find better alternatives for the quarantining. And which is why we never went into a lockdown, because everybody above 30 years old remember how bad lockdowns were. And we don't do that here. And so because of that, this is ruled constitutional. But because every other use would not be constitutional, I'm less worried about it.
What about the idea of the information that you get out to people? You said you thanked the 6% who didn't cooperate, which is, most people don't do that. You don't thank them for doing it. So talk a little bit about getting good information to people and how that's done. And I know you do it in a funny way. You do all kinds of things with dogs and stuff like that. So talk about why you do it the way you do.
Oh, you want to talk about dogs? Okay,
sure.
Please,
I knew you wanted to.
Yeah, please show the dogs. Okay, so this is the spokes dog of our Central Epidemic Command Center. The name is Zongchai, a Shiba Inu. And Shiba Inu is here reminding you that if you are indoor, you have to keep 3 dogs away, and outdoor 2 dogs away from each other. Otherwise, you have to wear a mask. And the dog reminds you to cover your mouth and nose when sneezing, and remember to pre-order your masks. This is looking very cute. And why do you wear a mask? Because a mask protects yourself from your own unwashed hands. So that links mask use and hand sanitation together. And we have this spokes dog because, of course, this has a higher basic transmission rate as memes go, as compared to conspiracy theories. And because people will share whatever that alleviates their anxiety. And sometimes it travels on outrage, that's misinformation. Or maybe it's even deliberately constructed. For example, there was a rumor that says, and I quote, tissue papers are going to run out soon, and because they're all being used to make medical masks, so run out and buy, unquote. And people do panic buying, right? And then at the time, 2 hours afterwards, our premier, who you just saw his front side, shows his backside, wiggling his bottom a little bit, says in very large fonts, each of us only have 1 pair of bottoms. And it's a wordplay because in Mandarin, tuan, to stockpile, sounds the same as tuan buttocks. And so it's hilarious. People share it. It maybe has an R value of 5. If every hour, 1 person shared to 5 other people. And so it not only catches on the disinformation, but it also actually vaccinates against disinformation. Because once you laugh about it, you literally cannot feel outrage about the same thing. And it's much more likely they will then remember that medical masks and tissue papers are made out of different materials, medical masks from domestic and the tissue papers from South American materials. And so this is what we call humor over rumor. And the humor over rumor makes sure that people can communicate and remix in however many languages or many other cute mascots that they have, instead of a very dull communication style from the government.
So when you're thinking about this humor over humor, misinformation, mass and disinformation, 2 different things. Are one is direct.
One is intentional and one is unintentional.
It's really, it's sort of the engagement becomes enragement, and the idea of it. Is it? How do you combat the misinformation, because it comes flooding over social networks and everywhere else? So how do you look at it, especially you're in a COVID right now, we're undergoing in the United States, anti-vax people, we're sort of gearing up for the anti-vax people to take over social networks. So talk about how you're going to be moving in to get vaccinated at some point in the next several months. So how are you thinking about that?
Well, the dog can remind you that this is a physical vaccine. And if 3/4 of people take the physical vaccine, we can keep the R value under 1. So if people do that, and people do that in Taiwan, we are less pressured to get everybody vaccinated on the biological vaccine. There is a more gradual piece of understanding, right, of basic spreading basic information. And the other thing that's going around, which I would like to highlight, is this network that we collaborate with people. So how do we know which trending disinformation are in place so that we can respond on average within 1 hour? This this is another example, which was a popular rumor that says perm your hair will be subject to $1 million fine. And our premier said it's not true. I may be bald now. I will not punish people who look like my youth. What we did is a labeling requirement. However, if you perm your hair many times a week, it will not damage your pocket, but it will damage your hair. Just look at me for what will happen to your hair, and so on. So this really is very funny. And how do we make sure that people understand that this is a trending rumor and then overtake it with humor? We rely on, again, the GovZero project called CoFact for collaborative fact checking. That is to say, before it makes its rounds on the public social media such as Facebook, it first makes rounds around end-to-end encrypted channels. In other countries, maybe WhatsApp. In Taiwan, it's called Line. And in the Line communication network, we rely on people who long press anything that they suspect is disinformation and forward it to the bot that is, to say, the CoFact bot. And so just like reporting and flagging spam to Spam House, eventually it gets what really is trending, even before it makes its way into the more public social media. And we work with international fact-checking network, including Taiwan Fact Check Center. There's also something called MicroPen. So we have 2 members of the Pointer IFCN in Taiwan to basically do the fact-checking. And we make sure that every time we see any trending disinformation.
So let me see a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah. For example, there was one just right before our election that says, and I quote, Hong Kong thug compensation exposed killing of police earns teenagers up to 20 million. It doesn't say which denomination of money. But anyway, so that was a disinformation that was making the rounds. And then the fact checkers in the TFCC checked that photo to a Reuters photo. So it was a real photo. But the Reuters caption says nothing about being paid or about murdering police, right? This is a very ordinary thing. And the alternate caption, which says that this 13-year thug bought new iPhones, game consoles, recruiting his younger brother, is, of course, intentional. This is disinformation, not misinformation. And because we don't believe in administrative takedowns, we can't and won't take down just from the administration. That's a judicial branch thing. And so we use instead notice and public notice, making sure that everybody that sees this on social media comes with this small footnote to it. Before you click share, it will remind you that this alternate caption is sponsored and designed in the Weibo account of the Chinese Communist Party's central political and legal unit. So basically, the state-sponsored propaganda. So it's okay for people to keep sharing it, but remember that this is foreign-sponsored propaganda, and that is our playbook, working both with the social sector on one side and also with professional journalists on the fact-checking journey.
Well, one of the issues that we've had here in this country and other places in the United States and elsewhere is the amount that's coming through. So how do you deal with the flood of information and then the reticence to even label things? I think that's just a recent trend in the United States, at least, the idea of labeling it and who decides who labels it. How do you think about that because our government just doesn't get involved whatsoever, but talk about the ideas of not taking it down yet giving people fair warning, essentially.
Right, it's about contextualization.
Right.
And in Taiwan, we have, according to Dr. Tsai Ing-wen on her first term as president now, but in her first term's inauguration speech, she said, before we think of democracy as showdown between opposing values, but now democracy must become a conversation between diverse values. And the conversation between diverse values, basically common values out of different positions, is why we deploy AI-powered conversations. Because when we say social media, many people think of the more polarized part of social media, which I call anti-social media, by the way. And then we can also construct pro-social media that is more pro-social. And so this was a real conversation back in 2015 around UberX. And Uber was a legally operating with rental cars and so on company back then. And then it introduced an extra line called UberX. I think the X stands for, not having a professional driver license. And then it creates a lot of tension, right, in a society. And people begin labeling each other. Like people says, Taiwan is not catching up with the Taiwan's not sharing economy. The other people said, if you're not carpooling, this is not sharing economy, and things like that, right? And so because of that, we used Polis to show people in relation to their friends and families what their feelings are among the people they know and love. So these are not nameless trolls or enemies. These are your friends and families, just you didn't talk about Uber over dinner. And then it shows the facts and allocate 3 to 4 weeks for people to just resonate with each other's feelings. So when we meet face to face and live stream to ideate, the best idea are the one that takes care of the most people's feelings, which then we turn into regulation. So this is Polis in action. We use it now very regularly. We have polis.gov.tw. And then basically this shows one feeling from your fellow citizen. I think passenger liability insurance is very important. If you agree, you move toward me. If you disagree, you move farther away from me. And then you see the next of the remaining questions. And then you keep pressing agree or disagree. But there was no reply button. So with no reply button, there's no room for trolls to grow. You can't attack me because there's no reply button. You can just offer your feelings for other people to reflect. And then we always end up with this shape. This may be the most important slide that I'm going to show this talk. We have the usual labeling, the ideological statements and so on here, and which is institutional media and also anti-social social media likes to focus on. But also people discover that we're at the same polity after all. People agree with most of the neighbors on most of the things most of the time. It's just it wasn't given airtime by media and also by more anti-social social media. So this was another conversation, not in Taiwan, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, whether people identify as Democrats or Republican, where they stand on those ideological issues. Everybody agree in that particular city, instead of science, technology, engineering, and math, it needs to become STEAM, that is to say arts are vitally important. And nobody disagrees with that, as you can very clearly see. And so these are the kind of rough consensus from the internet governance parlance that we can just work on and produce some running code, in this case, a code of law. So Uber is now operating as a legal taxi fleet, a Q taxi, but they and other taxi fleets are allowed to do, surge pricing and not painting their cars yellow and things like that. So basically common values that brings innovation that benefits everyone.
And how do you work with the companies? We're going to get some questions from the audience. We've got quite a few. When you think about the companies sort of running it versus the government, how much government intervention is required here?
Oh, this is open source software, so we run it on government premise. As I mentioned, the website address is literally polis, right, .gov.tw. If you go to polis.gov.tw, you see a running Polis instance, and we just concluded actually a Polis conversation around our ocean policy, which will be polis.gov.tw/ocean. So check it out.
So people get to participate in this without trolls moving in and manipulating the conversation.
That's right. And because this is run by the government, both the cybersecurity, the data safety, the possibility of opening data for independent analysis and audit are there by default. It is very simple to explain our algorithm. This is not deep learning AI. This is just k-means clustering and principal component analysis.
And how do you then balance it with the impact of social networks, private social networks?
Well, we engage, of course, the private social networks and share with them our societal norms. And so, for example, and I understand there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'll be brief. Right. So back in the mayoral election in 2018, that was the first time that the Control Yuan, the separate branch of the government, published the campaign donation expense as raw data, structural raw data. They always published it, but previously only in printed form. But they offer now as structured data, so everybody, independent investigative journalist, can do a campaign donors roster. And one of the analysis showed us that the social media advertisements were not accounted for in a campaign donation and expense, which means that there may be, foreign interference just by simply paying a lot of social media campaigns to the, largest social media companies. So we go back to those social media companies and say, look, this is a norm in Taiwan. You need to treat advertisements for political issues and social issues during our election as campaign donations. In Taiwan, our campaign donations are published as raw data for people to analyze in real time. And you need to do the same. Otherwise, you just refrain from running political advertisements. And also our campaign donations only come from domestic sources and they have to declare themselves. We do not, as a rule, accept foreign donations to our presidential campaigns. And if they don't adhere to the Taiwanese norm, they they may face social sanction. And social sanction actually is very effective, much more effective than legal sanction. And so foreign sponsored propaganda, campaign donation, and so on, I think Facebook choose to show the ads library in real time. I think the disclosure amount and rate is the best at that time as compared to any other jurisdiction that they work in. And Twitter and Google simply refrain from running political and social advertisement during our elections.
They do. Yeah. Facebook does not. All right. Let's ask some questions from the audience. Can Taiwan's system be duplicated anywhere, or could it have the same success if transposed to a different nation? That is an excellent question.
Very much so. And there is no fixed Taiwan model, right? We literally iterate on it every week, or if not every day. And so I think the basis of the Taiwan model is simply this very Buckminster Fullerian idea of, instead of fighting with the existing system, build a new system that will make the old one feel obsolete. And I refer to, for example, the presidential hackathon, which is deliberately set up for the Korea Public Service to share their best ideas and work with the social sector. If you show my screen, the presidential hackathon every year, out of 200 or so entries, for example, using assistive intelligence to detect water leaks or remote telemedicine, or to use the Pokemon Go-like game to get people to refill their bottles instead of buying more plastic and things like that. The champion teams received the trophy that's shaped like Taiwan with a micro projector underneath. And if you turn on the micro projector, it shows Dr. Tsai Ing-wen handing you the trophy and promising whatever you did in the trilingual team, the public, the private, and social sector teams in the past 3 months, we commit to make it national policy with all the personnel, budget, and regulation support in the next 12 months. So that's presidential power as hackathon prize. That's designed to promote collaboration from the front lines of the public sector. And so, of course, that sort of co-creative space is duplicatable, but whether it works or not relies on the basic transmission rate. If people who attend such hackathons, such co-creation sessions, and so on, can bring back some dog memes, I have to go back to the dog memes, very important, that convince their respective community that co-creation really works. And then you will get more and more people endorsing this new ways of policy making, of collaboration. But if people get into a very good, like Habermas style deliberation and agree with each other and make a complete agreement, but they fail to bring it back to their respective communities, then of course that idea will not grow.
Okay. What are your biggest reflection takeaways on the pandemic?
Sure. If I can choose only one thing, I would say that wear a mask to protect you from your own unwashed hands. This idea is very much worth spreading because it doesn't talk about anything altruistic. This is a simple reminder to wash your hands with soap, and referring to it as physical vaccine and have this spoke stock, getting everybody physically vaccinated, I think contribute a lot to the success of Taiwan in dealing with the COVID.
Right. You also have to believe there's actually a problem, but that's one of the issues we face in this country. In terms of the COVID response, it seems the secret sauce might be open data. How do you go about collecting the right data for such a crisis?
That's a great question. Indeed, we have already a system in place to link, for example, the health insurance data to, for example, the travel history. It was just without a constitutionally authorized Central Epidemic Command Center. Previously, we wouldn't link those two together. But with the constitutional authorization, because when we do the procurement, we say when you do a system for the Taiwanese government, you must make sure that all the human readable and writable parts also have open API, that's a Linux Foundation standard, readable and writable parts as well. Otherwise, you'll be disqualified for being unprofessional and discriminating against robots. Well, we don't quite say that, but it's the same effect. And so because of that, our systems are more like Lego blocks, that they could be used in a way that is connecting after they're made, because they leave sufficient amount of open API and documentations in the cybersecurity defended perimeter with a good defense in depth design, so that those different systems can be linked together when the situation calls to it. It, of course, relies on very robust technology stack, a private cloud, if you will.
Okay. Oops. What tips would you give governments across the world to create a richer tech ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the first thing to understand is that instead of asking people to come to technology, bring technology to where people are. and this may be the most important lesson. If we ask people to download apps that may or may not work on iPhone and may only work on Android and so on, and that actually is greenfield code. It would be new technology that's invented after the pandemic and will feel like technology. But because all our measures, for example, our mask rationing is basically the same as a recurring prescription system for pharmacists, are collecting the mask from the kiosk in the convenience store is the same system, the same experience of paying your income tax on the convenience store using the same kiosk. As I mentioned, the digital fence SMS warning is shaped the same as our earthquake and flood warnings. So the data collection works on the principles that people already understand and feels natural. And that creates the civic technologies ecosystem because people are more willing then to use the co-created applications created by the civic tech people, because for them, it's just increasing inclusion and accessibility instead of collecting new data. This is very important to remember.
Okay. A lot of people distrust technology, which is a good follow to this. You are a fervent believer in open governance and civil society collaboration, civil society government collaboration. At the time of the crisis like COVID, how do you build trust with the public around that?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think, as I mentioned, with the Foxconn VP turned into a member of the parliament, this is a little bit like the Pygmalion effect, which is saying that the more trust the government has in the citizens, the more trustworthy citizens become. If we refresh the open data of mask availability instead of every 30 seconds, if we refresh it every day, then people would not be able to keep each other accountable when they queue in line. And that will show a distrust from the government to the citizens. So the more trust that you place to the citizens, the more trustworthy they become. And they also provide a way to essentially with less than a week for people with blindness, with color blindness and so on, to have access to voice assistants and chatbots and things like that. This is essentially like a distributed ledger that builds trustworthiness over time.
All right, I have a very last question. We don't have any more time for the audience, but thank you for all your questions for the audience. They're excellent questions. What would you say a mistake you made? What would you like to go back and correct if you look at what you've done? What's something you would for the next crisis? Because you said you built on your SARS experience to this. What's the thing you think you need to work on more?
Yeah, for 48 hours back, I think around February, we wrongly said that in well-ventilated places, such as metro stations, you do not have to wear a mask if you're a healthy person. And that's the wrong message to send. Fortunately, people wore masks anyway, ignoring the CECC message. So we turned around and pivoted after 48 hours, saying, oh, sorry, we were wrong. You have to wear a mask anyway, as recommended. And here is the rationing system and the map. And I think it is very fortunate that we corrected ourselves within 48 hours. If we take instead 48 days to change the official message around the mask usability, Taiwan may be in a much worse place than we are now.
All right. Well, I would love you to come to this country and fix things. That would be fantastic. Anyway, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Minister Tang.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing this interview.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.
That was great. Live long and prosper. That was a perfect way to end. And what a session! Thank you, Cara. Thank you, Audrey. I thought the point about trustworthiness was definitely something that we could take forward from across the full day today. But also, it's really refreshing to hear someone talk about a mistake they've made. And I think that again is something that we, hopefully those of you listening can share with other people who weren't here today to join us. But I think that there is so many lessons from the last 4 sessions, and especially that last one. I'm never allowed to say this, but really, my God, that was one of my favorites. So thank you very much for being with us this week. We will see you next week for our CogXtra on sustainability. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. See you soon. Bye.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.